I built a Replit app to monitor hourly spend activity across selected Google Ads accounts and campaigns. My client almost lost an account because of this specific problem. So he was checking his campaigns one Friday night and he realized there's one campaign with high spend behind it that has not spent anything in the past 6 hours. So if he just happened to not find that campaign and wait till Monday, that'll probably get him in a lot of trouble. So that near miss is what made him ask for a solution. But here's the caveat. He did not want this alert for every single campaign in his account, just the critical ones that matter. So that's why I built this app where he could pick specific accounts and campaigns to track and also set alert frequency to hourly, daily, or weekly, and finally route notifications to either Slack or email. This app shows all active alerts in one dashboard and runs everything through an n8n workflow. Replit handles the front-end interface while Google Sheets manages the data. So here's exactly how I built it. So there's 3 main parts to the logic of this app, and it's all gonna be here in n8n. So first, we have a form state, and this just pulls the up-to-date account and campaign info under that manager account, right? Because this is where we're going to be pulling into the form the exact fields that need to be shown, right? So this is all the accounts under this specific MCC, and whenever you select any of these down here, it pulls up the campaigns that are associated with them, right? Because again, in this use case, it's not helpful to get that alert on every single campaign because some of them might be less important, or there's others that might be more urgent, so they need to be seen quicker. So that's why this is very useful, because once this is set up, the client knows that all the ones that they want are being tracked. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this workflow just to show you what happens on a daily basis. So this is gonna take some time. So this is a daily trigger because we want to check on a daily basis on any changes in the accounts. We're simply just pulling in all the accounts that are currently under that MCC. So here's the query that does that. You're going to be using this very frequently if you are running automations with ad accounts in Google. But then we're going to parse it to get the account name and the account ID, which is what we're gonna want to put into that sheet. And then we're clearing the current form of the sheet. Another way that you could approach it is to just update new ones or remove ones that don't exist. But for me, it's just really easy to just clear it. And because it's a daily trigger, it's not gonna, cause any rate limitations. So then we just process each account. We're fetching all the campaigns in those accounts with this query here. And then once that is done, we are parsing it as well. So parsing out the account ID, account name, campaign ID, campaign name, campaign status. Because eventually, once I get that, I want to filter for any accounts that are paused, because if they're paused, then clearly there won't be any spend and we don't want it to trigger. So once you finish all this, I would actually have it wait a minute because there's been another Google Sheets node not too long ago. So once this is running on autopilot, you don't want it to get rate limited. That's like the #1 issue that I've ever gotten with Google Sheets. I love using it because it's simplistic for data sources, but the problem is it gets rate limited very quickly. So once you wait a minute, then you just update that form state with everything you got in here, and here's what it looks like in the sheet. So pretty straightforward. And then I'll show you eventually how in Replit I configured it to pull all this dynamically. Cool, so that one's pretty simple. So once your form is correctly populated with the right accounts and campaigns, then you actually want to put in your first alerts, right? So the way that happens is you fill out this form, select, whatever accounts and campaigns you need. So I'm gonna just put in random ones here. And then select the frequency in which you want alerts coming in from the same campaign. So let's say it triggers, in this specific hour. How soon do you want to see that same campaign show up? Usually it's daily, so that's what I'm gonna put here. And then here is where the pass off happens from Replit to n8n, right? Because whatever that form submission becomes, that's what needs to be processed here. And that's where webhooks come in, right? So you have test URLs and production URLs. With test URL, you just click listen for test events. And then once you configure this correctly and you send it in, it should receive it just like that. And I'm gonna go ahead and pin it and just show you what the rest of this webhook does. So first we want to parse it just to, format the unstructured data and remove things we don't need. And then we're going to want to format for Google Sheets in, specific column format. And then I'm also pulling directly from Google Sheets just to get the current state and keep the non-matches, because we don't want to put in duplicate alerts into the system. And then once you do that, you just save it to the alert history, which is automatically mapping the already formatted columns. And then you also just want to just send a quick confirmation email to say that this went through the way it should. So that's what those are. And I'll show you real quick what that confirmation email looks like. So there you go. Nice and clean. So once all this happens, now in this second section under alert history, it populates the next alerts that should happen. And also if we go back to Replit, the alert history right now is just these 3 alerts, but if I hit refresh, here are the other ones we just added. So everything seems to be working smoothly so far. And then what happens next is, well, one, there's a small function called clear alerts, where if the user decides to clear all the alerts, start over, that would trigger that. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. I don't have to show you how that works. But then where all the logic really happens is alert triggers. All right, let's look at the alert trigger and how it works. So first you can notice we have an hourly trigger because we want to check hourly on the previous hour segment of specific campaigns to see if the spend was 0. So first thing we want to do is just get all the scheduled alerts. And we're getting that from that second tab, which is alert history. Same tab that gets filled out from the webhooks. So once we do that, we're gonna go ahead and do an if node and see if the last alert is not empty. If it is empty, that means it has never been triggered before, so we don't have to worry about the alert frequency. However, if it has been triggered, then that's where we go to the switch node and figure out if we are looking at hourly, daily, or weekly alerts. And if, depending on what it is, all we're doing is we're comparing the current timestamp to the timestamp that it should trigger again, right? So if we look at what this is returning, it's returning like, a string of numbers. And once that is less than this string with an additional hour, that means it's time to run again. If not, then it's too early. So, here it's hour 1, there it is day 1, and finally we have week 1. So once we gather all of the alerts that are qualified, we run them through this loop over items after we, append them. And here is just an HTTP request to pull the cost metrics that we need. And we're also selecting the specific hour that is the most recent. So, right now it's 11 p.m. So it's selecting 10 p.m., which in military times 22. So after we do that, and then I have it check to see if it returned anything, because sometimes it takes some time for the request to go through. So that's why you need to push it back and loop it again, try it again, right? So, in this instance, there's one that had to loop through again. And once we do get a result, then we parse it and get it ready for the rest of the workflow. So currently, out of all the campaigns I selected, there's none that had zero spend in the past hour. You could actually see here, what that spend ended up being. So, pretty like close to zero, but not exactly. This one, it looks like an anomaly, so I might want to look into that one. But overall, if we go back here, it just shows that it has last checked at a specific time. There's no last alerts because none of these triggered. And then it shows what the last hour was and the last spend. This one, I'm gonna have to double check to see what happened there. But as you can tell, that one did not work correctly. So it's one thing to note. And then I'll actually troubleshoot this live. So if it is a quick fix, you'll see how I would have fixed it. So the campaign question is paid search DSA max, right? So let's go into here, and the problem probably will be here because that's where we're pulling the data. So we want to find, not that one. Okay, there we go. So this is the problem. For some reason, instead of returning actual data, return this, whatever this crap is. So I'm going to copy that, put it into Claude, and try to figure out what the problem is. So I put it in the output. And then also you could copy this node like that, and it'll just copy the whole code that makes up that node. And then ask, why am I getting this output for this given input? And then I'm also going to share the input that I have for this one. So this is run 9. I think the problem was at run 4 or 5. Okay, clearly not. Okay, 6. So go back to run 6. So this is what was put in, and this is what came out. So I'm gonna get that, go back to Claude, see what it says. Because maybe this is just a limitation of the system, or maybe this is something I could fix. This is the output. That looks wrong. This might mean that the results are empty. It says use a search endpoint instead of search stream. This ended up being a bit more complicated than I thought. Basically, it sounds like there might not be any spend activity, although I have had instances before where it would output it even if there is no spend, which is the ideal scenario. And we could also look at this too in a campaign. So I'm gonna look into this specific account and see if it just doesn't have any spend, or if it maybe doesn't exist. All right. So it looks like this campaign, in fact, did not have any spend today at all. It is enabled, which is why my filter didn't work, because I have a filter beforehand. I had a filter here on which campaigns could be selected in the first place, and they needed to be enabled. So we have a scenario where the campaign is enabled, but it's not eligible because it's ended. So it's one of those campaigns that you schedule out. So I just found the edge case that I'm gonna need to troubleshoot further. I don't think I'll have enough time in this video, but just gives you an idea that, the systems aren't perfect, and you need to basically look at all possible ways things could go wrong. Basically, you need to troubleshoot ways on how you could either prevent it or address it. So let's go back into this workflow. So let's say we did have an alert for 0 spend hour. Then we would first, after it passes this test to see if the cost dollars is equal to 0 and the campaign status equals enabled, then it would go and then it's going to basically check to see if the user selected the email as an alert or Slack as an alert. They could have also selected both, and then we're just processing the input and formatting it for the specific channels. And I actually have examples of what those look like because I've tested this out a couple of times. So this was the 0. This is like the clear alert, and then where was my? So this is what it would look like if an alert had 0 spend. It shows which campaign, which account, and which hour that this happened, and also a link to be able to go troubleshoot it. So I'm going to go into the browser under which I am signed in, and this should bring me to that specific campaign. So yep, and there you go. So yeah, overall, pretty simple functionality, which was actually pretty difficult to implement because I was trying to make it very user friendly, right? For someone that doesn't want to get into n8n, doesn't want to do any like extra work or any technical components of this automation. This is the extra work that's required to make it simple. So now that we went through everything in n8n, let's go into Replit and see what my process was for building everything out here. So again, everything within this app is pulling directly from the Google Sheets. There's the first sheet, which is for the configure alerts section, mostly pulling ad accounts and campaigns, and this alert history section, which is pulling all the alerts that are active, and if and when they're either checked or sent as alerts, it's going to show up here and for the client to see. Let's go through the Replit process that I went through. So again, this took me around 4 days to make, and first it was all about just designing that interface, right? So I just wanted to make sure in my head, I was like, what are all the different functions that I'm going to need to have? And really it's just a form and then a display section. So once I got it all working the way I wanted to, I had issues where the webhook didn't map the data correctly. Like, I was wondering why in my Google Sheets, the IDs for the campaigns and accounts did not line up with my form state. Because the form state right now is the main source of the core IDs that are being used. So when it came here, it didn't match. I was like, okay, well, probably something to do with Replit, because there's not a lot of options here on why it didn't work. So basically, I had Replit troubleshoot it, and it looks like it updated the test configuration component to correctly map selected account IDs to account objects, preserving selection order. So basically it put things out of order and that messed everything up. So after I fixed this specific part, the rest of the troubleshooting that I had to do was very, design oriented. Let's look through my conversation with Replit while I was building this app. So first, I actually copied this over from another project. So I had like a general template to go off of. And first I was just changing a lot of, the text and the details. And then I actually, gave it a pretty big prompt based on what I got from Claude on the, structural changes we need in the design. So tab 1, create experiment, changes to configure alerts. New purpose, set up 0 spend monitoring parameters, copy changes, create new experiment to configure 0 spend monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. So, just like things to make it look the way it needs to. And then we're adding new fields. And a lot of these actually I removed because I realized they're redundant and it's gonna require more logic that isn't gonna be that useful. So, definitely want to make sure it's lean and efficient. So yeah, this part was pretty straightforward. And then, let's see, I'm trying to find areas where it was a bit more difficult. I'm configuring the campaign and account sections here. So, and then, you're able to select specific elements within the preview, which is neat. I think at this point, if we preview it, it had a weird section on top, which I didn't really like. Come on. So yeah, at this point, It had a weird section top that I didn't really like, so I just ended up completely scrapping that. And here's where I'm telling it what Google Sheets it needs to pull from. In order for this to work, by the way, you need to have the connector set up for Google Sheets. This is all I'm using for Replit to work the way it needs to for this app. And then in secrets, I have the webhooks that I'm using in n8n, the Google Sheets ID, and then the session secret. I think it created it on its own. I'm not sure what that is. So there we go. So preview. So yeah, overall, you know, a lot of design choices. Again, sometimes I lose my patience. I don't think it was correctly pulling from Google Sheets. So as you can see, like vibe coding is a lot of just giving directions in words, right? Because, you know, this is all made by the AI, and the way it knew what to do is just me explaining, you know, what the next step needs to be. So definitely this is something that anyone could learn and become great at. And you know, for business owners that are focusing on their main service, their main craft, it's very valuable for them to outsource it to people like me. That way, you know, they could be more efficient with their time. So now, you know, just kind of walking through issues that we're going through. This is, I think, part of the webhook problems that I'm seeing, where right now it's not pushing data through the way it needs to. Like, it's not putting an account name, which I need to push through the alert history correctly. So, you know, I'm sending in screenshots referring to what I'm talking about. So yeah, I've had a lot of problems with the webhook, and what helped was sometimes just reverting to plan and then walking through why the problem might be happening. So pull from alert history, Google Sheets tab to fill out the alert history section of the app. Make sure to refresh the first time it's clicked into. So that's when I was building out this section. And then I'm trying to make sure that, yeah, I think at this point it fixed the issues we're having with the webhook. And then what's this one? So error validation error when submitting form. One thing also that I want to do is refresh more frequently when data is changed in the Google Sheets. So it actually set me up with this button to refresh, and this pulls, you know, all the recent data from the Google Sheet, which is nice. And it looks like actually while we're working on this, it activated on its own, which is pretty cool. Here's where I basically formatted my alert history sections the way I want it to be. So that's the complete zero spend alert app I built for my client in Replit. He now monitors just the campaigns that matter, gets alerted immediately when the specific campaign gets zero spend, and he doesn't have to worry about missing anything ever again. Email me to get the Replit app and n8n workflow. The email's in the description. Also comment below what you're currently building for your accounts. I'll see you in the next one.